welcome to the Getting Ready for the USMCA Trade Agreement seminar. We'd like to thank Mexico Now for the opportunity of teaming up with you for this event. We'd like to thank our guest speakers, and especially I'd like to thank you, the audience, for signing up. Our agenda today is Mr. Javier Gileta's presentation from the federal government perspective on the USMCA Trade Agreement. We have George Murray from Oliver Wyman Consulting, American Consulting Group. Kenneth Smith, who was Mexico's chief trade negotiator for the agreement. I have to remind you before we start the presentations that recordings of this will be available in our website, so you don't have to worry about taking so many notes. Right now we start with Mr. Javier Gileta's bio. He holds studies in economics and urban development, including several postgraduate degrees. And currently he serves as head of the task force designated by the Ministry of Foreign Affairs to promote investment and economic development in the country. I present to you Javier Gileta. Javier, welcome, and thank you very much for joining us in this event.
Thank you everyone. Good morning to all of you. It is a very special privilege to be speaking to you on perhaps the most important you could say treaty that we've been pursuing as a region, and that can have important impacts on how we're going to develop the region for the future. First of all, I'd like to start by thanking Alejandro for the invitation, and furthermore, my minister and vice minister. Perhaps you're not all aware, but we had a reform last year where the investment promotion agency, ProMéxico, that we had got divided up, and it moved to the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, and I am now heading these efforts. I can very gladly say that from having 60 different country offices, we've actually grown to 117, yet our main interest is to develop our regional assets. Let me go ahead and share my screen just for, oh, there we go, thank you. So the key idea here is just to give you like a brief introduction as to what we're doing and how we're looking at things. Could you hit the next one, please? So the North American Free Trade Agreement, so it changed. So the key change, instead of going into the aspects in terms of what actually changed on it, I believe that the key thing here to bear in mind is that we are moving forward to a different regional integration aspect, where the possibility of generating cross-border, you could say like brands or regional projects is now a reality. And that is something that, due to the current situation with COVID-19, is going to actually strengthen our value chains within the region. So the USMCA, just very briefly, ensures certainty in trade and investment. It strengthens our competitiveness as a bloc, which is key. We must understand that we are no longer competing just only between ourselves, but we're actually competing abroad. We're competing definitely with Asian economies, at the same time European economies, yet we still have a lot of connections and value chain integrations that we need to leverage upon, that the TMEC actually, the USMCA actually enables for these to happen. I'm going to go to the next one just real quick. So what we're trying to do is not only, we need to work beyond only the thought of trade by itself. We need to look at what are we doing to integrate our different clusters. We have within all the geography of North America, different areas and different clusters that can actually combine and generate much more value. But this value is not only important for the industry itself, but also our governments. Our governments need to look at what are these key areas? What are we going to do in order to generate these synergies, and at the same time, develop the different technologies that we have so that we can become much more competitive. Something as Europe has done for the past several decades on looking at what are the different areas and clusters they have for their industries and trying to connect them. And that is something that, even though the industry and privates do focus on it and they do push for it, it requires a strong presence of the state. It requires more than just pretty much telling them you are supposed to meet so and so and you're supposed to work together. It's actually providing a platform for people to come together and find different ways of approximating production problems, at the same time development. So that would be point number one. Number two, also, before you move on, so The second point has to do with multinationals are searching for domestic supply chains to reduce costs in trade of intermediate goods. It's also important to say that value chains are changing globally. So COVID-19 has brought a very special strain on global value chains, and they've mostly been disrupted. And this disruption in particular actually proves the importance of having more localized production within the region. Mexico is particularly poised to enable this production for the region, but above all, we need to think of this of whatever Mexico brings to the table is also going to be of benefit to the States and to Canada. So, and vice versa between the three different countries. And although multinationals play a key role, it's also important to have the general regional incentives in order to make these happen. And that is a major challenge that we need to work on in order to make this happen and pretty much have a unified North American, you could say, I'm not going to go into the whole branding thought of it, but we are a market in ourselves, and we are a production platform, and at the same time we are a technology development platform as a group. And third one is global demand changing towards consumption in emerging markets. That is also something where Mexico plays a key role for the region. Although there is a lot of production clearly in the States, and at the same time, the whole bloc has a very important advantage, that our bloc can actually produce and generate all the different parts of value chains that can be exported to emerging markets. Mexico is one of these ways out, you could say, or ways to export more effectively and to produce at a, you could say, a considerable low cost, but above all, it provides the opportunity to use the regional advantages that we have, for example, with Latin America, in order to export there, while at the same time providing enough access also to TPAT that can enable also other markets such as Vietnam for sorts. And then I'm just going to go real quick to the next one, please. And I'm just going to show you what is the new thought. Why are we seeing things differently? And what's the key difference between the previous agency, investment and trade agency that we had, that was ProMéxico, and now what we're doing? So pretty much what we thought is we need to first think strategically as to what are the key connections we have. And our key number one connection is without doubt the relationship we have in North America. We are a regional bloc that's enabled us to develop, to bring prosperity to several areas of the country. There are important challenges in terms of inequality that require several government intervention aspects in terms of how do we provide health, how do we provide effective education, and so on and so forth. But in terms of economic development, Mexico has greatly benefited from NAFTA and USMCA. Will begin a new chapter in the development of the country. If you could go to the next one. So pretty much what we're trying to say is that we need to look at what are the different audiences we have as a country. So we've pretty much divided our program into 5 key regions. And what we're trying to do is using the powerhouse that the regional economy of North America means, and we're leveraging upon it. We're trying to use our different cultural and at the same time potential, you could say, diplomatic relations that we have with several countries and regions in order to leverage more and to be able to have specific messages be brought to different areas. While in the COVID crisis, unfortunately, we had several issues importing several key assets in order to to protect the Mexican population, or trying to import them from the States. We emergently, or as an immediate need, look towards China to attain these assets. It's important to mention that it was only possible because of our diplomatic relations with them. And that leveraging between Mexico and China was able to enable us to have more than, well, we've flown in several dozen planes of different you'd say, personal protection equipment, which includes all the way from face masks to ventilators that have helped us within the pandemic. But if you look at this beyond, it also enables us to use these diplomatic strengths that we have combined, because let us understand that the States has a different way of looking at things, Canada as well, and Mexico as well. But if we all three look at our diplomatic advantages, we can push our economic agenda much forward. The next one, please. So pretty much what we're trying to do is we want to create unified messages. So what does this mean? So bottom line is we have one voice abroad, one same voice that is pushed through our diplomatic channels, and our ambassadors world over have their key objectives, which are, and can we move to the next one? And I'll just explain, which is three areas. So first of all, it has to do with, you need to have your ambassadors focused on government relations. You need to have the appropriate government relations. Second of all, high level relationships. What does this mean? So you need your ambassador to be close to several chambers of, you could say, commerce or particular business associations. And at the same time, get to know the key actors on it. And finally, you also need to think for the future. And what does this mean? We need to develop all the different human resources, but at the same time, what research are we going to share? So what is it, not only what we're going to do within the North American region, but how are we going to connect with other regions and leverage upon also their research capacities? And that is what we've called economic diplomacy. And economic diplomacy pretty much says we're going to use everything we've got to have a unified message and have one same voice abroad. And this has important implications in terms of investment and trade, because what happens is when a Mexican company or a Mexican conglomerate is going abroad and they have their ambassador by their side that can push through the key aspects the country has, this enables not only for the benefit of Mexican companies, but Mexican partnerships. And our key partnership is with the United States, and our companies are closely integrated with these value chains. So you're not only going to have the regular, or you could say economic or commercial counselor or attaché at the embassy help you, but you're going to have top level diplomatic help or aid through our economic diplomacy platform that will enable for all your value chains to also leverage upon it. Our second goal has to do with foreign investment, and we're focusing on two things, and this is also for the benefit of the value chains. So first of all is we have our great relationships and specifically addressing key funds world over. So we've chosen 10 funds that we're going to work with and that we're going to have a strategic monthly, you could say, connection with them. Through that, we intend to push forth our different infrastructure projects, but also the private sector projects. So this is also key because we're trying to generate with these value chains and with these regional integration aspects, try to look forward on how we're going to do this. And then promotion of strategic projects. And finally, on trade, we're focusing on two things: trade missions and strategic fairs. Not all the same, you could say, fairs abroad. And all of this boils down to one actually minimum viable prototype work that we're doing, which has to do with 8 different missions that we're conducting in 8 states within the United States. And it has to do with pretty much looking at 8 value chains that we're going to focus upon and try to leverage upon these to generate specific results for them. And bottom line is we're trying to support industry and business to do some very specific, you could say, projects on it. We're not looking only at platforms right now. Since we're pushing through this vision. We're hand-picking projects to actually push them forth directly from the government. And then could you go to the next one, which is my next to last. Next one, please. One more. There we go. So pretty much, no, before that. So pretty much what has happened is my office has created something that pretty much makes all the different investment opportunities go through our diplomatic offices abroad. So all the different offices that we have abroad actually pretty much tell us here in the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, we have all these different opportunities. And then from there, how we take it is we go to a committee that's at the president's office level, where we actually speak with the Ministry of the Economy and also our Exim Bank, which is Bancomex, so that they can decide which ones they want to move forward upon or not. And from there, then we go to the rest of the federal government if somebody is interested on it and how they're going to support it. Second of all, local and state governments. And finally, different chambers of business or business associations. How does this make a key difference? Because in the past, everyone tried to do it differently, and everyone tried, sometimes we had made as many as 20, 25 trade missions going to a particular country. What we're trying to do now is we're going to have 5 trade missions to that country, and we're trying to pull everyone together on these in order to make these things happen. And how is this of interest to all of you? The key thing for us is that you will be able to look at it from an industry perspective. And if there's a specific project, what we're going to try and do is bring the federal government on board your project, have a local state government be a sponsor, and finally have the same voice of the ambassador pushing your investment abroad, where at the same time opening a market for you. Obviously, all of this has to do with the way we do diplomacy in Mexico, yet at the same time is guided by the Ministry of the Economies of Mexico views on what are the key regions and key aspects for it. I hope I didn't go beyond my 15-minute marker, but this is where I'd leave it at, Alejandro. Thank you.
Javier, thank you very much for your time. I think it was a great presentation. I think we will all be very interested in seeing how this plan is implemented. So I'm sure we're gonna be all interested in seeing you in further seminars with more of how this plan is developing. Thank you very much. It sounds like a very ambitious plan, and we'll be glad to hear from you in the future. So we're gonna continue with our next speaker. Our next speaker is Mr. Jeff Murray. Jeff Murray is a partner at Oliver Wyman, a $2 billion global management consulting firm, supporting board of directors. Jeff supports clients, especially in aviation, aerospace, and defense industries. I'll leave you with Jeff and his great presentation. Thank you, Jeff.
Thank you very much for the introduction, Alejandro, and thank you very much for the opportunity to speak with you today. Thank you, Mexico Now, for coordinating this session. As Alejandro explained, I'm Jeff Murray, partner in the Chicago office of Oliver Wyman, but as Alejandro and as many of his colleagues know, I spent a fair amount of time in Mexico, in Chihuahua and in Mexico, where we have a large, meaningful office and meaningful strategic presence. What I'm going to talk about today, and I'm from the aviation and aerospace team at Oliver Wyman, is how foreign direct investment is being impacted by COVID, is being impacted by travel trends, and what that means for the future of investment. And we can advance 2 pages, please. So the key messages today, and I'm just going to walk through this very quickly. I'm going to try to get through this material in 10 minutes or less if that's possible. But the key messages and what we'll see today are that after a slowdown in foreign direct investment in Mexico and across the world, we've seen an increase from 2018 to 2019, but resulting from COVID, we're expecting a pretty steep decline in 2020, and there's evidence of that already. But foreign direct investment specifically is heavily dependent on travel. As investors seek to understand local capabilities, infrastructure, customs, build relationships that you can't build on Zoom and that kind of thing, that's all facilitated by travel. So as part of that, and as part of the impact from COVID, we, Oliver Wyman, conducted a meaningful survey of travelers, and we're going to hit on the high points of that. And the major insights are that nearly 60% of travelers are going to embark on domestic trips only. They're not going to be comfortable with international until a vaccine is introduced and until COVID-19 has significantly abated and subsided. And based on that traveler sentiment, which is significant, we may not see pre-COVID travel levels return until 2023. So to enable investment, we're going to be challenged. We're going to be challenged because of the challenges that air travel is facing. Point number 3, the current economic environment is putting significant pressure on suppliers, whether they're in automotive, in aerospace. I mean, across the economy, companies are significantly challenged. So they are focusing on costs, and they're going to look for opportunities to lower cost across the globe, again, facilitated by travel. And what that means is we'll be paying close attention to their supply chains. And the implications are for governments and regulators are to create efficient cross-border trade. We can go to the next page, please. So what we see here are really 4 things. We're looking in the dark blue at global foreign direct investment. We'll start in 2015. That was $3.8 trillion. Then we're going to look at Mexico foreign direct investment at $46 billion. And then you'll see a handful of spaghetti lines across the top of the page, which are capturing the proportion of investment relative to 2015. So for example, if we look at 2016, global foreign direct investment at 3.6 trillion was 94% of where we were in 2015. Interestingly, Mexico took a significant hit in 2016 with their foreign direct investment going down to $31 billion. So what we've seen is globally that decrease in foreign direct investment from 3.8 trillion in 2015 all the way down to 2.5 trillion in 2018, a decrease across all of those years. But in Mexico, we've seen an increase since 2016 from that nadir and from that low point of 68% in 2016. We see that reaching 83% in 2017, 92% in 2018, and 94% in 2019. And what that demonstrates is that companies have made significant investments in Mexico, more so than what we've seen across the globe. So it's an important message, but I'm sure, as we all know, given by the current economic challenges, OECD and other entities have predicted that foreign direct investment in Mexico could reach a low of 15 billion in 2020. So it means a significant challenge. And we're going to talk about some of those challenges on the next page, please. So as I explained at the beginning of the talk, one of the areas that Oliver Wyman, my firm, pays close attention to are traveler trends and what's happening at the macro level aerospace and aviation market. And at the end of the day, that's driven by trade. And trade comes through cargo, it comes through travelers, but as we all know, a large proportion of that is travelers. So what we did is we conducted a survey of 500 travelers. The survey was done in May, and we asked people just a handful of questions, really 2 questions. The first one was, where are you going to go? And the second one is, why would you go there? Or why would you not go there? So the answers to the first question is insightful because close to 60% of overall survey respondents said, I am just going to fly domestically for the remainder of the year. I'm not going to embark on international travel. 25% they would do primarily international, and around a quarter, 27% said they would do both. So that's across everybody. Then we broke that into airline elite members who are the very frequent travelers. 48% said, call it 50%, they would primarily be domestic. 17% said primarily international, but over a third said they would do both. So that's meaningful because those are the guys who travel. Those are the guys who are enabling trade and who are supporting foreign direct investment. And then if we looked at general and non-loyalty members, the folks who aren't flying a lot, heavily domestic, 59%, only 14% international, and 26% traveling equally. So then we asked, so that's the first question, where are you going to go? And the answer was domestic. Then we asked a second question, which is why? And the belief is, and this is important from a foreign direct investment perspective, is that the pandemic situation is more severe internationally. Now, what's relevant here is we did this survey in May. And I think, as we all know, the US in particular is going through some significant challenges now We're going to be asking this survey again in July. So please check in on the Oliver Wyman website to see those results, because I anticipate they're going to change, particularly given the domestic environment. So the insight here is domestic travel, and folks are worried about the pandemic outside of their own country. If we can go to the next page, please. So how this translates into the recovery of travel is important. And what we've looked at is we've looked at the A4A, an industry group in the United States, their revenue. And we said, okay, when is that revenue expected to come back to 2019 levels? And we built 3 scenarios, what we call an accelerated scenario, which would having us actually get back to 2019 levels around a year from now, June or July of next year. And you see that as the light blue dashed line on the leftmost side of the page. Then we have a baseline scenario, which is what we consider the most likely scenario. That has a more tempered recovery to it, and that shows us returning to 2019 travel levels in the middle of 2022, so about 2 years from now. And that's one that we believe has some robustness to it. And if we look at travel trends in other parts of the world that are recovering from the pandemic, this synchronizes against that data. And the third is a prolonged impact, saying, okay, if we have a full-on second wave, what does this look like in terms of fleet growth and in terms of traffic growth, like we talked about on the previous page? And that would have the recovery going all the way through the end of 2022 into early 2023. So significant. But the baseline, which is what I want everybody, if they can, to remember, is that we're thinking the recovery is about 2 years from now. And this is built on travel data, surveys, and fleet data that we have access to. So it's meaningful. If we go to the next page, please. So what that means, how do we enable a more rapid recovery, and how do we enable greater trade? Well, companies are going to need to pay particularly close attention to supply chains. They're going to be affected by borders, both inbound and outbound, the propensity to travel, and the recovery in demand. So we're going to see all of those issues, the propensity to travel, the recovery of the industry, influencing foreign direct investment, much of which is associated with supply chains. So what are the big impacts associated with COVID-19, particularly as they relate to foreign direct investment and cross-border trade? Well, the biggies are decrease in availability of labor. And this is based on a literature search that we just did in the past week. Port closures in over 50 countries. So even if I am able to invest, am I going to be able to get my goods and materials out? A 10 to 20% drop in cargo was reported in February, more dramatic in March. Increase in the cost of PPE for my workers. Increased quarantine documentation requirements, which are impacting both cargo travel and passenger travel, and increase in price of shipping containers and cargo due to that restricted movement. So as we look at foreign direct investment and how to enable it, one of the main elements is to enable cross-border trade. So that means ensuring that labor is available. My ports are open. I've got cargo movement. I have PPE in place for my employees and my crew members. I'm able to facilitate quarantine documentation requirements, and I'm able to help to the extent I can, influence the price of shipping. So those are the main messages. It was around propensity to travel, recovery of the industry, and the importance of supply chain. If we can go to the summary messages on the next page, please. So the summary messages from us, from Oliver Wyman, are foreign direct investment showed a recent uptick, actually in the case of Mexico, meaningful uptick since 2016. So how do you continue that trajectory given the challenges associated with COVID? The challenges are going to be associated with international traveler sentiment. So to the extent that, frankly, Mexico can become not necessarily part of the US, but people considering it domestic travel, local travel from South Texas and that kind of thing is would be beneficial. And lastly, broader industrial challenges, specifically cost-related challenges, are going to put a focus on supply chains. So governments and regulators must ensure cost-efficient trade. Thank you very much, Alejandro.
Jeff, thank you very much for this very interesting message. I like the idea, what you mentioned at the end of your presentation, where Mexico could possibly be considered domestic for the US because it's a very short trip. So I think that that's good potential for our industry in particular.
Absolutely, and I actually think that's a sentiment that's been in place for a while. Thank you, Alejandro.
Thank you. So now I'm going to go to our next speaker. He's Mr. Kenneth Smith Ramos. He's former Mexico's chief technical negotiator for the modernization of the USMCA. He has extensive experience in working for the Mexican government. He's a specialist in international trade negotiations, and he has been a key part of Mexico's negotiation team in the last USMCA agreement. Thank you very much, Kenneth, for being with us today.
Thank you very much, Alejandro. It's a real pleasure to be here. Let me thank, first of all, American Industries for the invitation, as well as Mexico Now. I'd like to jump right away into our presentation, if possible. Thank you very much. So the idea is to share with you where we are in terms of the results of the USMCA, where can the opportunities be found, and how can companies prepare to take advantage of these opportunities. So I'll start with the next slide, please. The first few slides that I will show you tell us where we are and why. Basically, I'll go through this rather quickly so that we can get to the substance of where the opportunities are. But it's important to know that at the beginning of the negotiations, the US and Mexico had diametrically opposed views of what should be accomplished in the USMCA negotiations. Mexico had four main pillars, which is the one that I'm showing on the screen, essentially trying to build upon 25 years of successful free trade. So the idea was to be able to modernize our agreement, bringing it up to date with the disciplines that are essential to today's economy, ensure that we can strengthen competitiveness and that we don't have a sort of a backtracking of regulation or access within North America. Also including new chapters along social lines, issues that are very important to make the agreement more inclusive and responsible, and also to maintain the legal certainty of the agreement, basically all of the mechanisms for dispute resolution. So that's how we went into the negotiation. The next one, please. We very quickly saw that from the perspective of the US government, there were key elements that they were pursuing that completely clashed with our view. And I'll just mention two of them, which are shown here in the chart. Basically, the US went in with the idea that injury had been done to the US economy, even though there was no empirical evidence that the NAFTA had caused that. And that therefore, you know, the agreement had to be changed drastically to fix the trade deficit. That's why the US focused very heavily on the issue of our rules of origin and trying to make them stricter, especially in the auto sector. And the other big red flag was the idea of the US to do away with dispute settlement mechanisms, arguing that impartial extraterritorial arbitration panels went against US sovereignty because they challenged decisions by US courts or the US executive government. And the other elements that you see are elements where the US made proposals to establish managed trade along the lines of the key sectors where Mexico has had tremendous success within the NAFTA. So obviously this was unacceptable. In many areas, we managed to resolve this, and I'll show you how in the next few slides. So if we go to the next one, of course, here it shows you the timeline of how we reached an agreement by the end of 2018. There was a next phase of the negotiation, which involved working with the US in trying to convince the Democrats in the House of Representatives to agree to vote in favor of the USMCA. And finally, all three agreements were ratified in the three countries. And now it's coming into effect, as you know, tomorrow. So if we go to the next one. Next slide, please. Yeah, this one. Basically, what did we achieve? And it's along three main areas. We were able to introduce 12 new chapters that modernized the agreement along the lines of disciplines that did not even exist when the NAFTA was originally negotiated. On digital trade, further competition, an open competition environment in telecommunications and information technologies, disciplines on anti-corruption, how to internationalize SMEs so that small and medium-sized enterprises can take advantage of the agreement and of the network of trade agreements that Mexico has in place, and many others that make up the new USMCA. So if we go to the next slide, please. We also were able to eliminate a lot of the proposals that, in our opinion, would have caused disinvestment in North America, and that would not have helped us build upon 25 years of successful free trade. So whether we're talking about eliminating obstacles in the access to the US on agriculture, or on textiles, or on government procurement, all of those were taken off the table. In one chapter that you will not find in the USMCA is a chapter that has to do with trade deficit reduction goals. And this was very important because Mexico and Canada did not accept the possibility of having trade barriers imposed if a country has a deficit with another USMCA partner. And this would have done a lot of damage to the North American trade relationship, but also to the multilateral trading rules. So that's very important as well. We go to the next one. Finally, we had agreement on the most controversial issues. And we knew that there were elements that had to be part of the agreement, that were pillars of the agreement, such as dispute settlement mechanisms, and we were able to preserve them. And that is essential to ensure that there can be compliance on the part of all three parties. We were also able to eliminate a sunset clause that would have killed the agreement after 5 years of existence, unless the heads of state would agree upon that. We were able to remove that and institute a mechanism for 6-year review, a comprehensive review of the agreement. And then the main issue here, which is I'm sure of interest to all of you, the major changes that were made on the rules of origin in the automotive sector. We were able to guarantee free trade, to establish robust rules to promote regional integration, so more North American content in the production of automobiles, and Mexico obtained an insurance policy in case of extraordinary measures of national security. If the US wants to impose them on the auto sector, they can do it to any other country in the world except Mexico and Canada. And that's a big plus in terms of investment attraction. So if we go to the next one, this I will let you just look at for a little bit, and I won't go into all the details. This is a set of complex rules of origin for automotive goods in the USMCA. What you essentially need to do is, and to know, is that there were important changes to the way the value content is calculated. We increased the regional value content from 62.5% to 75%, and there are new concepts included in the rules of origin. The labor value content, which establishes that 40% of the value of vehicles in North America have to be produced in regions that pay $16 an hour or higher. And there's also an important requirement on steel and aluminum, that 70% of OEMs purchases of steel and aluminum have to be from the region. So all of this is very important. If we go to the next one, of course, this presentation will be available for all of you, so you don't have to take notes on this. You'll have the presentation after. Basically, it shows some of the concessions that Mexico was able to extract in exchange for making the rules of origin stricter, which is what I mentioned on the extraordinary measures on national security. Mexico will be excluded from those, as well as any increases that the US may do unilaterally to the most favored nation tariff in the WTO will not apply to Mexico, to the amount of 1.6 million units of vehicles and $108 billion worth of auto parts. And this is very important as an insurance policy, that in case the US dramatically changes its trade policy with regards to automotive goods, Mexico and Canada will be excluded from any restrictive measures. If we go to the next one. Here in the auto sector, basically you see the different elements and the transition times for each one of these components of the rules of origin. It's very important to understand how these work and what they contemplate. So I will leave it at that for the auto sector. We can turn now to the next area, which is very important, which is essentially looking, we go to the next slide, at what are some of the elements that we have with the USMCA as we head into its entry into effect. The USMCA will obviously bring great opportunities, and I will emphasize those, but there are also risks because the US is in an electoral year. So there is the risk of, once again, the issue of agricultural seasonality and restrictions on Mexico exports to the US raising its ugly head. because Florida is pressuring to try to provide protection to citrus growers there. There's the risk of the US deciding to favor US unions between now and the elections in November, starting labor cases against Mexico. So we must be, any company operating in Mexico must be very clearly aware of the rules in order to try to avoid any risks there. And of course, there's always the risk that President Trump might decide to unilaterally threaten tariff increases. These are some of the elements that we face in terms of the risk. Now let's look at the opportunities that we face here. And some of them have been mentioned by my colleagues already. So if we go to the next slide, we can talk about this a little bit. You know, key officials of the US government have signaled that the COVID-19 epidemic is signaling the end of global supply chains. Here's a statement by Peter Navarro to that effect. And also Ambassador Lighthizer, the United States Trade Representative, wrote an article saying that the era of offshoring US jobs is over. And it is a fact that a lot of companies, as was mentioned earlier, will be looking to have their supply chains closer to home to reduce costs and especially reduce risks. 6 months ago, nobody was thinking about the possibility of a productive paralysis because of a pandemic. Now it's a reality and companies have to watch out for that. So bringing in supply chains closer to home is going to be a tendency going forward, we believe. And a key element for Mexico is that we can be a key platform to receive that investment, to produce in Mexico and supply the US and Canada, our USMCA partners, but also Mexico as a trampoline, as a platform for the rest of the world, because we have 12 trade agreements with 46 countries. What is the issue here? Mexico has to be able to convince the US that investing in Mexico is not offshoring, it's nearshoring. Essentially, Mexico is part of this North American production perimeter that can strengthen North American competitiveness. It can strengthen Canada, US, and Mexican competitiveness. So that's something that we need to work actively with the US in our investment attraction programs, also the government-to-government relationship, so that Mexico is perceived as being part, and as we are, of this production perimeter in North America. If we go to the next one, we can begin looking at some of the key sectors that can benefit from the USMCA and the new rules. There are some key factors here that I've put on this slide, which is, as I've mentioned, there are stricter rules of origin. So for example, in the automotive sector, companies from other places in the world like Asia or Europe or South America realize that to take advantage of the North American auto market, you must invest in the North American auto market. And Mexico continues to be the most attractive place to invest in the auto sector out of all three countries in North America. So that means that key sectors that were already big in taking advantage of the NAFTA, such as automotive, aerospace, machinery, and equipment, should continue to do so. Now, in the second element here that I place in the slide, we show some of the new sectors that I think could grow tremendously. Mexico is already a player in the production of medical equipment, whether it's personal protection equipment or advanced technology medical equipment. And that's something that without a doubt will grow now in this new normal era that we enter, where we learned from the COVID-19 crisis that the access to medical equipment, pharmaceuticals is essential. And the investigation and development, research and development on pharmaceuticals is also very important for the future of the national security of the region. So Mexico is very well positioned to receive a lot of investment on medical equipment and pharmaceuticals as well. We just passed a law that implements the new intellectual property elements of the USMCA that are key to guarantee that legal certainty for innovation in Mexico, and that can open the door to pharmaceutical investment in our country. And also the digital economy. The new rules of the USMCA open the door for the growth of e-commerce, and the investment in the digital economy is the way to go in the future. We're seeing that in Europe, we're seeing it in Asia. There's no reason why we shouldn't see it in Mexico as well. And all of the types of services that are related to trade, and as trade begins, hopefully by the end of the year or early 2021, to start growing again in our region, everything having to do with logistics and transportation and efficiency. You know, the customs procedures that are being eased throughout the USMCA will obviously generate more trade and more demand for good logistics and efficient transportation structures. And finally, the agriculture and agribusiness sectors are very important, because the COVID crisis showed us that it is key to have agricultural production be maintained and increased even during a pandemic, and to be able to get that to the tables throughout North America. So both agriculture, the primary production, and agribusiness has a very strong potential in our region and in Mexico specifically. So if we go to the next one, basically it's interesting to look at Mexico, and we can provide more information individually if you want, as to where to locate the investment. And we have very important investment clusters that have been developed over the years between Mexico and the US, where electrical and electronic products are concentrated in the northern border, the Guadalajara region, especially the software, central Mexican Silicon Valley around the area of Zapopan near Guadalajara, the automotive sector throughout many states of Mexico, but primarily in central Mexico and the northeast, medical equipment and aerospace as well. You see here the areas. Querétaro is a very important center for aerospace, and everything having to do with R&D, back office operations, the main metropolitan areas of Mexico, as well as Querétaro and the southeast, are important investment regions now and will be so in the future. So the next one shows us, the next slide, having shown the opportunities, the risks, the sectors that are out there sort of for ready to receive investment. This is a very important slide because it shows what we believe to be the USMCA compliance checklist. I talked about rules of origin, so it's very important that every company understand the rules of origin in your particular sector. Customs procedures and trade facilitation are areas that were dramatically changed in the USMCA vis-a-vis NAFTA, and it's important to understand the uniform regulations, the simplification of procedures, and how these will take place so that you take advantage of the opportunities brought by the USMCA. I mentioned the issue of labor. Labor is very important because the chapter is now an integral part of the agreement. It is subject to dispute settlement and it has teeth. So companies must conduct internal compliance audits, and we can help with that in order to make sure that you comply with all of the different elements that come in the USMCA so that you may not be subject eventually to a labor case or a situation that could lead to a loss of preferential access into the US or Canada. Also, on the issue of digital trade, understanding the opportunities that this generates is very important. And there are very important opportunities in the energy sector as well. The energy reform that Mexico did in 2013 is consolidated within the USMCA. So the Mexican government has the obligation to honor that. We know that there have been certain policies recently that have gone in a different direction affecting renewable energies, but it's very important that the Mexican government and also private actors understand that the USMCA allows for private sector investment with specific conditions in accordance to our constitution and our laws for investment in the sector. And now in conclusion, I just basically want to give a sort of a global view of where Mexico stands and what we need to do in order to continue attracting investment. So if we go to the next slide, please, very quickly, just to close. Basically, Mexico has to focus throughout the world on everything that we're doing in trade policy, combined with proper domestic policies that promote an environment that is propitious for investment and for business. Basically, a transparent environment that reflects what we're doing internationally in domestic public policy. One thing that we can do internationally, of course, basic issue is correct implementation of the USMCA, ensuring that we comply with the commitments and having a firm position vis-a-vis the US, especially in an electoral year, to ensure that the US complies with the agreement and so does Canada. And as you know, we concluded the upgrading of our FTA with the European Union. It hasn't come into effect yet, but it will. We have already the Trans-Pacific Partnership Agreement, the CPTPP, the Pacific Alliance, and we're negotiating with certain South American countries. So it's very important, everything that Javier Gileta mentioned at the beginning of the efforts that the Mexican government is launching to promote actively our exports and attract investment. It's very important that we dedicate the necessary resources to that, because it is the way to take advantage, not just of the USMCA, but all of the other trade agreements that we have in effect. If we go to the next one, this is the concluding slide. And basically what it says is that Mexico, it would be able to reach the forecast that the World Bank and IMF are establishing, that by the year 2050, Mexico could become one of the 7 largest economies in the world. But in order to do so, we must continue to deepen our trade liberalization agenda. We must accompany that with public policies in Mexico that are transparent, that generate a good environment for doing business, and that can create confidence worldwide as to the ability of Mexico to comply with international commitments and to be transparent in providing the confidence for national and international investors towards the future. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Kenneth. I think this was a brilliant explanation on very clear and brilliant explanation on what this trade is all about. And I think people will have the opportunity to download your presentation in the upcoming days in the American Industries Group website. So they'll be able to have details because there were very, very interesting charts to look at there. So thank you. The opportunities, the optimism on nearshoring opportunities, I think that was great. Great to hear it. So thank you very much. Thank you very much. And we'll be close. Would you like to say something? No? Okay. I thought you wanted to. But thank you very much. And we'll hope to hear from you in the future with more commentaries on how everything is evolving regarding this treaty. Thank you. So now I'm going to present the presentation on why do we believe that Mexico is at the right moment. And it ties well with what Kenneth was saying in his presentation. Mexico is the top destination for reshoring operation. And that it's not only a marketing slogan, that is a reality. And we'll see some stats on that. Why so? Well, because we're 80% less shipping costs from here to the North American continent than from Asian countries such as China. There is 75% less transporting costs, and we have 117 operating terminals. We have a competitive labor cost, which is 10% more competitive than China's, considering fully loaded cost hourly rates. We have talent availability. We have 1.3 million coming into the market, million workforce coming into the job market every year. 30 years age, which is a very young population. More than 110 engineers graduating each year, and we're top 8 in engineering producing, so to speak. The Mexico has depreciated against the dollar. That actually makes us more competitive. It is usually a competitive currency, and that means more competitive labor costs, competitive indirect materials, and competitive shipping costs. And what I was telling you about, according to FDA Markets magazine, in the latest 100 projects that have moved from one location to the other, Mexico leads by far. Second is Vietnam, but with half projects. So we've been very successful in the latest transferring of plants comparisons. The impact of COVID-19, I think that's also going to benefit all of North American manufacturing. Why? Because companies and governments have realized that it's important to have pharmaceuticals and medical equipment, telecommunications, automotive, and aerospace nearby because of potential supply chain disruptions. USMCA opportunities is very close to what Kenneth was saying and Javier. We have the supply chain, we have human resources, and we have international trade compliance. So we have legal certainty with the USMCA agreement, and that is very important. Next. So if you're thinking about relocating to Mexico, we recommend the shelter services, which is basically a program that is approved by the Secretariat of Economy. Next. What are the shelter services? It's a package of administrative services where we team up with the arriving company that has the know-how on how to manufacture, but our part of the service is to do the administrative side of operating here. What are not shelter services? We're not contract manufacturers, we're not limited consulting services, and we're not recruiting agencies. Why does it matter so much to have a partner like a shelter company accompany you in your first years? Because Mexico has different laws, different language, different culture, and different business environment. And one of our slogan is focus on your core business and let shelters handle everything else. So you bring your manufacturing expertise and we take care of all the services, administrative services to support your operation in the first few years. When is a shelter an ideal partner? When you want a quick startup, when you want an experienced partner, when you want a partner that has established robust processes and systems, when you want a comprehensive administrative service provider, and when you want the leverage of an established local network. Apart from shelter service, American Industries has site selection, business case support to calculate how much it would cost you to operate in Mexico. That is actually very valuable. Shelter program and industrial real estate, your ideal space solutions. What is covered under the shelter? Basically, the most important parts are human resources, accounting, and customs and logistics. The benefits of the shelter program. You obtain a quick startup and lower cost, trouble-free access to operating in Mexico, full compliance with Mexican laws, minimum supervision, minimum liability, and no VAT cash flow effect. Why American Industries? Because we do, as opposed to other competitors, we do have indirect purchasing. We do not charge 16% cash flow effect on indirect purchasing. We have both frameworks, incorporated and not incorporated. We're very predictable in fees. We have a robust IT platform. We have ISO 9000 certification on all of our processes, and we have ongoing consulting services. If you're interested in establishing an operation in Mexico, this is our contact information, and you can also visit our website after the event. So I believe this is the end of the program. I'd like to thank Mexico Now, our guests, distinguished guests that participated. They were very brilliant, eloquent presentations. Thank you very much. Thank you very much to everybody, the audience especially, and we'll be sending you information on further events later on your emails and social media. Thank you very much.